As we head into the Nintendo Switch 2, there's lots of things to be excited about, and I, for one, am very, very excited, but there's also lots to be concerned about. I have some major worries about the Nintendo Switch 2, 4 things to be specific, and in this video we're going to get into all of that. The first thing I'm concerned about is that it's not going to live up to the Switch. And I don't mean that as in just console sales. I mean, think about it this way. By the time everything's said and done with the Switch, it would have sold about 165 million units. So for the Switch 2 to do that or more, it's gonna be pretty difficult. But we've seen Nintendo fail to follow up to past success time and time again. We saw the Wii U come out and do nothing compared to the Wii. Don't think the Switch 2 is going to have the same fate, but I do think it's going to be more akin to what happened to the 3DS. The Nintendo DS came out and it was great, some really good games. And then the 3DS came out and it did not live up to the Nintendo DS. The Nintendo DS, I believe, sold about 160 some odd million units. And then the Nintendo 3DS sold about 70 million units. I think we could see something similar happen with the Switch 2. And of course, as the gamer, you and I, that's not going to make a difference for us, but what it does make a difference for is that Nintendo might be a little more shy or more lenient with the games and the frequency of games that they release if that ends up being the case. The Nintendo Switch came out and just flew off the shelf this entire console generation, and probably still will going into the next, at least for a little bit. So of course, Nintendo had zero reservations on launching anything and everything. We've seen so many games this generation that we would have never seen otherwise. Remember that 50-in-1 game that came out a couple years ago? Who would have ever guessed that was going to come out? Especially one that's just a collection of board games and just random mini games. Like, what? But it came out and it was a great game and it sold really well too, which just surprised everybody. Or even more recently last year with Nintendo World Championships, that game had no reason to exist, but because the Switch is just so grandiose and there's so many people and everyone buys everything that comes out on it, it made sense for them to do that. So my concern with that is that the Switch 2 is not going to hit Switch numbers. My concern is that it's going to be slightly under, or maybe just a little bit more under, that's a little bit more noticeable. Let's just say it sells 100 million console units this entire generation. I don't see Nintendo taking chances in doing interesting new niche content if that ends up being the case, and that concerns me. Another thing that concerns me with the Nintendo Switch, going on to point 2, is that because the Switch 2 is going to be so much more powerful, that's going to make game files very, very large. I think for the first time in history, we may see a cartridge-based game where the entire game is not on the cartridge. I mean, we already know these cartridges are expensive. If I remember correctly, the last I checked, it was like $16 for the smallest cartridge. So that adds on to the Switch tax, which is why games were more expensive on the Switch to begin with. I think we could start seeing the Switch 2 have very, very small files on the cartridge, making it to the point where buying these games physically aren't even gonna matter, which for me is a very big deal. And I guess tied into the exact same point, I do fear that Nintendo's gonna charge for the upgrades to the Switch 2 for your games. If Breath of the Wild 2, gets a remaster on there and you already own it, I don't think we're gonna get the remaster for free like what's happened from PlayStation 4 to 5. I think they're definitely gonna charge for us again, and I'm not looking forward to that. The third thing that concerns me with Nintendo Switch 2 is that little port on the side that the Joycons connect into. As I mentioned before, my Joycons, oh my god, I've gone through so many because of stick drift. And then now looking at this looks like something that could break, like actually genuinely break extremely often. Like it's going to be a major point of failure, which many people have already talked about, not just myself. I'm concerned that that's going to end up making it so where we end up having to buy multiple Switch consoles, kind of like what happened with the Nintendo DS. A lot of people had to buy multiple DSs because that Switch hinge kept breaking. That was a major issue back around 2005, 2004, 2006. I remember friends I had in elementary school would go through so many DSs, like 2 or 3 in a school year, just because of that. But back then, those consoles were cheap. Especially with inflation, they were cheap. But now this console at minimum is gonna be $400. So if we end up having to pay $400 because you take your Joy-Con out a little too fast, that's just ludicrous. Like, who approved this design at all? And my biggest concern with this is that the Switch 2 is going to be a very corporate console. When you look at the Nintendo Switch, for the majority of the console generation, there was 2 people that headed that all the way through. And that was Reggie Fils-Aimé and Satoru Iwata. Satoru Iwata unfortunately passed before the console came out, and then Reggie Fils-Aimé was there to help plan out everything. And then after that, we got Doug Bowser in, and since then, he's kind of taken a more corporate approach. He's not really in the limelight. He's not really talking to the fans. I mean, even Masahiro Sakurai, we've not seen much of him since then. And even though it's not going to affect the games at all, I do worry about them taking a more corporate approach going into the Switch 2, because one of the things that made the Switch so magical was how goofy and fun it was. Same with the Wii. Remember that commercial where they all walk up going into the house and they say, "We want to play with you"? Like, Nintendo and being playful, that is like a forefront of their character. And unfortunately, it looks like modern Nintendo is very corporate, very gray. I mean, look at the console itself. It's not even colorful this time, which isn't the biggest deal, but it's just a sign that, hey, things are going corporate now. This isn't about playing games and having fun. We are a legitimate business. We are legitimately trying to make as much money as we can. And that is just something I don't like, because Nintendo's at their best when they're playful. They tried the corporate approach for the Wii U and it flopped head first. They tried the corporate approach on the GameCube and it flopped head first. Corporate approach on the Game Boy Advance even, same thing. They were fun with the DS, they were fun with the 3DS, they were fun with the Wii, they were fun with the Switch, and if they're not fun with the Switch too, it's gonna suck out a lot of the enjoyment for me personally, because I've loved their commercials, I've loved these directs, I've loved everything about it. But if they're gonna go with this corporate approach, it's just like what they're gonna be doing, I'm not looking too forward to it. But what about you? What are some things that concerns you going into the Switch 2? Let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, channel today, and I'll see you in the next video.